Schmitt. Senator, great to see you. You're kind of a newcomer compared to Mitch McConnell. Of course, anybody is compared to Mitch McConnell. Nobody's been a leader that long. And I got to start by saying something positive. I know there's a lot of people saying some negative things, but without him, as bad as our whole legal system seems to be now with lawfare and all of the other problems, it could be a lot worse were it not for his work getting some pretty good judicial appointments in, right?
Yeah, I mean, look at some of those big wins on the Supreme Court. Those are monumental and generational, and certainly appreciate his service. You mentioned it. I'm one of the younger members, one of the newer members. I'm that senator sitting in the back row now, as he referenced, hoping people know my name, I guess, and recognize me walking around. But, now that he's made that announcement, I'm sure there'll be a lot of attention turning to, who would follow him. And I think for me, is again, somebody that was recently elected and come from a state like Missouri, just want to see somebody who's, reform-minded,
yes,
a conservative leader, somebody that I think will lead us to greater prosperity, lead the party here in the Senate. It's an important role, and hopefully we'll be in the majority after November.
Well, and you used a very interesting word that can be used in different ways, reform-minded. What do you mean by reform? And was Senator McConnell a help in reforming things or a hindrance?
Well, I think there's a few things. There's some of the inside baseball. I mean, look at the way Chuck Schumer runs the floor right now. It's these omnibus monstrosities that are unveiled, at midnight, no time to read them, and vote for this, or you support a government shutdown. That's a false choice. I think we need to have an open process on the Senate floor. It's supposed to be the world's most deliberative body. That's not what we see right now in Washington under Chuck Schumer. We don't see open amendment process. We don't see, time to debate these bills. I'd like to see that change. So whoever the new leader will be, is certainly some of the questions I'll ask. But then also, look, as a party, we represent working people. We ought to be for energy dominance. We ought to be for a secure border. We ought to be moving legislation when we get in the majority after November that makes Americans more prosperous. I think that's what people expect. When we get out on the campaign, we talk about things that we actually go do those things and deliver those things for the American people. So I'm sure over the next several months, as this kind of unfolds, there'll be some of the questions I'll be talking to my colleagues about.
I do want to mention a few people because there are personalities. Personalities are included with what we get from senators. And some people look at the longer term senators, not the newbies like you, but Senator Cornyn or Thune, and see them as sharing something in common with Mitch McConnell, which is they care so much about the Senate as a body that sometimes they care a little less than perhaps they should on party unity. They look at somebody like Senator Barrasso and thinks he might be the right kind of middle guy who shares your vision of reform, but also cares a lot about the deliberative body.
Well, look, I've got a good relationship with all of them, and I fully intend to, whoever's running. I don't know if that's an exhaustive list or if any of them actually will throw their name in the hat. We're obviously just hours after this announcement, but have important conversations, substantive conversations on what all this looks like moving forward. I can tell you that I'm struck by the disconnect that happened that's here in Washington in many ways. They're very different conversations that we're having here in Washington when you're home, when you're talking to people about the things that they care about. So for me, I'll be looking for a leader that speaks to that actually we're the party, of the people who are going to fight for them. We're going to take on, the ridiculous agenda that we've seen from Joe Biden and the Democrats and move America in the right direction.
And maybe at the very least, just get back to regular order, something that for several hundred years, the Senate was pretty good on. It kind of lost track of that, I guess, about 40 years ago. Do you think we can get back to regular order, like coming out with a regular budget?
I hope so. I mean, look, that's what people expect us. And I also think a lot of the tension that you see here, there is a bit of a pressure release valve when people from, very different states have a chance to go onto the Senate floor and say, hey, I have an idea. I have an amendment. And you try to build support for that. Right now, rank and file members, Republicans and Democrats, quite frankly, are shut out of that process. This should not be a situation where 4 people, 2 people in the House and 2 people in the Senate, are deciding something that's like a stone tablet that no one can amend or change. I think that's the kind of reform I'm looking for. And you're seeing that there's conversations among members, Republicans and Democrats. I think there's a bubbling up that individual members want to be empowered. And look, you might win some, you might lose some, but at least you get a shot, because that's why I ran for office, is to advocate for the people of my state to try to, put this country in the best position possible in the people.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of stuff I think that for me will be a big focus.
Let me switch to something that you handled before you were actually in the Senate, and that is this continuing saga with the president and his student loan forgiveness. Something that you helped challenge in the courts. The Supreme Court made a decision. You can't do all these $100 billion plans to retire student debt unless the Congress weighs in and votes some kind of bill in order to do it. And yet the president keeps on doing it. He lost it at the Supreme Court with Biden versus Nebraska. I think you were a part of that, about bringing that decision to the Supreme Court. And yet he continues to do it. Who's going to stop him now? I mean, is there another state getting ready to sue him, to take him to court again?
I hope so. I mean, Missouri, when we brought that lawsuit with a bunch of other states, including Nebraska, we had the standing hook because Missouri had a loan servicing agency that was ultimately the big question before the Supreme Court, who can bring this lawsuit? And I was, proud to help lead that effort because it saved taxpayers literally $500 billion. That was the price tag. And he had no authority under the law to do it. It was just some, craven, cynical desire to get votes. And I think it's the abuse of the administrative state in that way. Again, another kind of reform I'd like to see happen where we disempower these bureaucrats that aren't accountable to anybody and put that power back in the Article 1 branch. If you think it's such a good idea, Congress should have to vote on it. Then voters can judge us by our votes, which is why these things should be separate, individual appropriation bills and you name it. But yeah, he's back at it again, and it's a lawless administration. There's no law that they won't bulldoze to get their way. The Democrats are the party of open borders and lawlessness, and that's what we're seeing in their actions, whether it's on student loans or at the border.
Well, that's very interesting you say that, because that was going to be my next question, kind of bringing it out broadly. And the next president, if he or she is a Republican, the question is, will they tackle the sort of demise of faith that Americans have in our system of law and order now because of all the lawfare that's going on against particular politicians or policies they don't like? I mean, is there any way to restore the trust that many Americans have lost in our system of law and order?
Well, I think that's why the Republican Party has to be the reform party. We have to fight against these abuses of the administrative state, the recklessness that we saw with the Biden censorship regime. When I was Attorney General, we filed the Missouri versus Biden lawsuit that's going to be heard before the Supreme Court. A federal judge has already called it Orwellian because of the censorship that took place on millions of Americans. The Democrats are literally trying to take President Trump off the ballot and throw him in jail for the rest of his life. So I don't need any more lectures about quote-unquote threats to democracy from the Democrats. They're talking about themselves. So I think we've got to restore trust.
How, though, Senator? I don't mean to press you too hard, but how can we do that? How do you regain trust that you've lost?
Yeah, well, I think we've got to get rid of a lot of these people at the top who are leading these decisions, right? I mean, Merrick Garland they're going after Catholics. They're going after parents who showed up to school board meetings. And we have to have,
so you're talking about Director Wray at the FBI.
Yeah, well, look, and also I've got legislation here that says if you've been censored, an individual in America then can sue that individual government bureaucrat to provide accountability. So it wouldn't just be a state like Missouri and Attorney General, but you as a citizen, if you've been censored, you can sue that individual. That would, I think, send the right message that we're not going to tolerate censorship. That's just one example. But I think making sure we have a secure border has got to be at the top of the list. You see the crime that we see in fentanyl. That'll be something that I know President Trump will be focused on.
I don't know if you heard the president today. This has got to be the last question, but he was talking about crime. He said not a word about this dramatic and horrible increase in violent crime from a lot of the illegal migrants, many of whom presumably were let out of jail by Venezuelan President Maduro. I don't think it's coincidental that there is this gang connection with Venezuela and a lot of the crime being committed on the streets of our cities. So wasn't it irresponsible of him not to say a word about that?
Yes, and by the way, that's true. In Venezuela, a lot of they had terrible criminal activity there. They got them all out of their country, and they're here. A lot of them are here now. And this is a very inconvenient truth for the Biden administration. But look, David, the truth is they're the party of open borders. This is what they believe. And now we're seeing the results play out in real time. You've got sanctuary cities now pulling back on that because they've seen the disaster. The American people see it. We've got to have a secure border.
Senator Eric Schmitt, one of the newcomers in the Senate, saying goodbye, at least to the leadership of Senator McConnell. Thank you very much for being here. Good to see you.